Okay, this video is going over examples. Again, these notes are at the top of your homework and they're also listed in Canvas, so you don't have to worry about writing them down right now. Just kind of follow along with me so you understand the concept, and I'll look back up here periodically as well. Or you can pause it, I guess, and look as well. All right, so hopefully you've already watched the video and you understand that because I cannot combine these, I have to change how I do the problems. I try to get first every term on one side, zero on the other. So I'm trying to get everything on one side, zero on the other. It's already done on today's homework. So step 1 isn't going to be needed today. We're focusing more on steps 2, 3, and 4. Step 2, once you get everything on one side, look to factor the polynomial using one of the methods we've done the last month. Look for a GCF, check and see if it's a special binomial or difference of two perfect squares, check and see if it's a trinomial, 1x squared easy math game, or check and see if it's a trinomial harder math game where it's bigger than 1x squared. I do not have any of those types on today's homework. Okay, I look at this one and they both share a k, so this is a GCF. Always check for a GCF first. That was the main error that people made. Don't look and see if it's a binomial or trinomial first. Look and see if there's a GCF. And this has a GCF of k. I pull out a k. And the concept, like I mentioned in the other video, I don't care what subtracts to get 0. I need to know what multiplies to get 0. Because as you know from the 0 property, the only way two things can multiply to get 0 is if either one of these guys are 0. So I set this one equal to 0 and solve. There is nothing to solve, it's just k equals 0. And I set this one equal to 0 and find out that k has to equal positive 4. A k squared is going to have two answers. In this case, it's a 0 and a 4. Come back and check it. And you can see that 0 squared is 0. Negative 4 times 0 is also 0, and then 0 minus 0 is 0. But there's a second answer of 4. If I put a 4 right there, 4 squared is 16. If I put a 4 right there, negative 4 times 4 is negative 16, and it still checks. Okay, so in this kind of problem, when you can pull a k out, pull a variable out, that's going to lead to an answer of 0. And then the other answer, I need to figure out what does it take for that to be 0, and I need a positive 4 right there. So solve and get positive 4. Okay, number 2. Okay. I'm going to fold this over so we can see it better. Okay, first of all, again, we have an x squared and an x, so we can't combine like terms and get it down to one variable term. So therefore, I have to solve this by factoring. Step 1 is get everything on one side, 0 on the other. It is. Step 2 is factor it using one of our methods. Okay. This time there is no GCF. This is not a binomial. It's a trinomial. It's a 1x squared, so this is the math game kind. What multiplies to get the third number, but will add or subtract to the middle number. My options are 1 and 8 or 2 and 4. To get a negative 6, I need 2 and 4, and I need it to be a negative 2 and a negative 4. So basically, I'm switching this from an adding and subtracting problem to a multiplication problem. We don't care what add or subtracts to 0. We need to know what multiplies to get 0. The only way two things can multiply to get 0 is either one can be 0. So the next step is set each one equal to 0 and solve. For that to be 0, x should be positive 2. For this one to be 0, I add 4 and x is positive 4. My two answers are x equals 2, x equals 4. Come back up here and plug it in. 2 squared is 4. I'm going to put the work right there. Put a 2 right there and get negative 12 plus 8. And we're trying to find out, does that equal 0? That's negative 8 plus 8. and the two sides are equal if I plug a 2 in. But we're saying we could also plug a 4 in. If I put a 4 right there, that'll give me a 16. If I put a 4 right there, that will give me a negative 24 plus 8. And I need to find out, does that equal 0? When you combine those, you get negative 8 plus 8. And sure enough, it checks. My two answers are 2 and 4. Okay. 0 was not an option here, because if I put a 0 there and a 0 there, that'll give me 0. But when I add 8, that will not equal 0. Anytime there's a plus a number like that, you're not going to have a GCF like you did on number 1, where they share a K. So I pull a K out and I get 0 for one of the answers. Okay, that leads to 0 for one of the answers. Okay, I'll try to do the next couple examples a little faster. Okay. I have everything on one side, 0 on the other. I look to factor it. This is a math game. What multiplies to get 32, but adds to 4. It's 8 and 4. To get a negative 4, the 8's got to be negative. The 4's got to be positive. When I check it or FOIL it, that's negative 8x and positive 4x, which is negative 4 in the middle, negative 32 in the end. Okay? So we factored it. And now that we have a multiplication problem, the only way things can multiply to get 0 is if the first one's 0 or the second one can be 0. Solve this one by adding 8 and get positive 8. Solve this one by subtracting 4 and getting negative 4. On these kind of problems, this last step is just going to be a one-step equation. Okay, most of you will end up doing that step in your head, but I prefer you not skip it. Number 4. Again, I can't combine these, so I want everything on one side, 0 on the other, which is. Step 2, I factor it. This is a math game trinomial. So it's what multiplies to get negative 35, but adds to 2. It's 7 and 5. To get positive 2, the 7 is the positive, the 5 is the negative. So this factors into x plus 7, x minus 5. That's why we spent almost a month factoring, because to solve x squared equations, you need to know how to factor. And now that I have a multiplication problem, set that one equal to 0 and solve. Set that one equal to 0 and solve. My two answers are negative 7 and positive 5. To try to keep the video shorter, I'm not checking these, but the answer is negative 7 and 5. Actually, I want to change this problem, since that was already like number 1. This could also happen where you have something like an x squared minus 64. You could actually do this problem two different ways. You could do it using factoring. There's no GCF. It's a binomial. It's a special one with a difference of 2 perfect squares, where you factored into x minus 8, x plus 8. And then now, because we have a multiplication problem, you set this one equal to 0 and solve and get positive 8. Set this one equal to 0, solve, and get negative 8. Okay. So I did this using factoring. You could also do it like Wednesday's homework, because there's only a single x term. You actually could get the x's on one side, numbers on the other. You do that by adding 64 to both sides. X squared equals 64. Take the square root of both sides, but remember, when you take the square root, the answer is not just 8, it's also negative 8. And notice, positive 8, negative 8, positive 8, negative 8. So when there's only a single x term, you can still isolate the variable like we did Wednesday. But when there's an x squared and an x, you can't isolate that. You have to use the factoring method in this problem. Okay, I'll do one more here. Since I cannot isolate the ends by combining them into one term, I have to use factoring. This is a math game. 15 to get 8 is 5 and 3, both positive. And then now that I have something times something equals 0, I find out how to make that one 0. and get -5. And I find out how to create a 0 out of this by setting it equals 0 and solving and getting -3. Sorry this video went just a touch over 10 minutes, so it's going to be a little harder to download. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me and I will try to answer them as quick as I can, especially from 9 to 3.